The colony of Vega 9 was not a place people chose. It was a place people ended up. 400 settlers lived there on the far edge of human space, stuck on a dry, rocky world with orange dirt, thin air, and two suns that never seemed to set at the same time. The buildings were made of recycled shipping containers and welded scrap metal. The farms were small and stubborn, pulling food from soil that did not want to give it. And above it all, sitting on a plateau of black stone like a king on a broken throne, was the dragon. His name was HFY. He was Draconi, a species older than most star maps. His body was enormous, covered in dark, iron-colored scales that caught the light like hammered metal. His wings, when he spread them, could block out the sky over half the colony. His eyes burned the color of melted bronze. He had claws that could tear open a warship's hull. He had fire in his chest that burned hotter than plasma torches. And he had a reputation that stretched across dozens of star systems. A reputation written in ash. HFY was a warlord. Or he had been. The stories said he had destroyed entire fleets by himself. He had burned cities on worlds whose names were now forgotten. Civilizations that had taken thousands of years to build, he had ended in days. No one knew exactly why he had stopped, or why he had come to this useless little planet at the edge of nowhere. He was already here when the colony ship arrived 3 years ago, and when the settlers realized what was sitting on that plateau, half of them wanted to leave immediately. But they had nowhere else to go, so they stayed. Governor Danny Holt had made the rules simple. Do not approach the dragon. Do not speak to the dragon. Do not look at the dragon for too long. And above everything else, stay out of his shadow. When HFY came down from his plateau, which he did every few days, usually to drink from the reservoir at the colony's edge, everyone went inside. Doors were shut. Children were gathered. No one made a sound until the ground stopped trembling under his footsteps. It worked. For 3 years, HFY ignored the humans completely, the same way a person might ignore ants living near their doorstep. He did not help them. He did not harm them. He simply existed above them, ancient and silent and terrifying. Katie Marsh had lived under that shadow for 2 of those 3 years. She was 29, a field medic, and one of only 3 people on Vega 9 with any kind of medical training. She had come to the colony with her husband, Cole, because they wanted a fresh start, a quiet life on a new world, away from the noise and politics of the inner systems. Cole had been a cargo pilot, good with his hands, quick to smile, the kind of man who could fix anything and make you laugh while he did it. Cole had been dead for 11 months now, a pirate raid on the colony's supply ship. Wrong place, wrong time. The kind of death that was too small and too random to mean anything, which somehow made it worse. Katie did not talk about it much. There was no time. She had a colony to help keep alive, and a baby to raise, and most days those 2 things took everything she had. Her daughter, Lily, was 11 months old, a small, round-faced girl with dark hair and wide brown eyes, that looked at the world with the fearless curiosity that only babies have. Lily had been born on Vega 9. She had never known Earth. She had never known her father. And she had absolutely no understanding of why everyone was so afraid of the big dark shape on the hill. That was the problem. It happened on a Tuesday, or what passed for a Tuesday on a planet with a 30-hour day cycle. The sky was a dusty amber color, and the wind was low, which meant the air was clearer than usual. Katie was in the medical shelter, stitching a cut on a farmer's arm, when she heard the low rumble that made her stomach drop. Footsteps, heavy ones, the kind that you felt in your teeth. The alarm didn't need to sound. Everyone already knew. HFY was coming down. Katie finished the last stitch quickly, told the farmer to keep the wound clean, and hurried to the living quarters to get Lily. Around her the colony was doing what it always did, going quiet, going inside, pulling shutters closed. She could hear the dragon's breathing now, a deep, slow sound like wind moving through a canyon. She pushed through the door. She looked at the crib. The crib was empty. For one full second, her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. Then she saw the gap at the bottom of the door that didn't close right, that she had asked Pete Callahan to fix twice, and the cold spread through her body like ice water. She ran outside. The colony's main road was empty. Dust drifted across the packed dirt in slow, lazy curls. At the far end, near the reservoir, HFY stood like a mountain of dark iron, his massive head lowered to the water. His shadows stretched across the ground like a black river, swallowing the road, the fences, the storage sheds. And there, right at the edge of that shadow, sitting in the orange dust with her hands in the dirt and her face turned up toward something impossibly large, was Lily. Katie's legs almost gave out. Every cell in her body screamed at her to run, to grab her daughter, to scream. But she couldn't move, because the dragon had stopped drinking. His great horned head was turning, slowly, with the patience of something that had lived for centuries. Those bronze eyes found the baby. They narrowed, they focused. 400 people held their breath behind their shutters. Katie's hand went to her mouth. Her vision blurred with tears she didn't have time to cry. Her baby, her tiny, helpless 11-month-old baby, was sitting in the shadow of a creature that had destroyed worlds. And Lily was laughing. The sound of Lily's laughter was small and bright in the enormous silence. It floated up through the dry air of Vega 9 like a soap bubble, fragile, impossible, completely out of place. She sat in the dust, her little hands opening and closing, reaching toward the dark shape above her, with the simple greed of a baby who has seen something interesting and wants to touch it. HFY did not move. His body was still as stone, his massive head tilted at an angle that brought one of those burning bronze eyes directly in line with the tiny creature below him. His nostrils flared slightly. The muscles along his jaw tightened. Every person watching from behind their windows was certain, absolutely certain, that the next second would be the last one that child ever had. Katie forced her legs to work. She took one step, then another. Her boots crunched on the dry ground, and the sound felt impossibly loud. She kept her hands open at her sides, palms facing forward, the way you might approach a wild animal. Though calling HFY a wild animal was like calling an ocean a puddle. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She was maybe 40 meters away when Lily did the thing that changed everything. The baby stopped reaching up and started moving forward. Her hands went flat on the ground, her knees found their position, and she crawled, not away from the shadow but into it, straight into the deep black pool of darkness cast by the dragon's enormous body. She crawled until she was directly beneath his lowered head, close enough to touch the thick, armored scales of his forelimb. Then she grabbed one of the smaller scales near his clawed digit and pulled. She pulled herself upright. Lily stood for the first time in her life, holding on to the claw of an alien warlord, wobbling on her fat little legs, and she looked up at the dragon's face and made a sound of pure, delighted triumph. Katie stopped walking. She stopped breathing. She waited for fire, for a roar, for the casual flick of a claw that would end her whole world. Instead, HFY lowered his head. He lowered it slowly, with a care and control that seemed impossible for something so large. He brought his face down until it was barely a meter above the child. His jaws stayed closed. His eyes, which had watched civilizations burn, looked at this tiny standing human with an expression that Katie, even through her terror, could not misunderstand. It was surprise. Real, genuine surprise. Then the dragon did something that no human had ever seen a Draconide do. He opened his mouth just slightly, and he breathed out, a long, slow, warm breath that washed over Lily like a gentle wind. It smelled like hot stone and something older, something electric, like the air before a storm. Lily closed her eyes and smiled. Her little fingers tightened on his scale. Katie didn't know it then. She wouldn't learn it for months. But what she had just witnessed was called the bonding breath. Among the Draconi, it was the most sacred gesture an elder could perform. It was reserved only for their young. It meant protection. It meant belonging. It meant, you are mine, and I will burn the universe before I let it touch you. No Draconi had ever performed it for an alien. In their entire recorded history, spanning tens of thousands of years, it had never happened. Not once. Katie took another step forward. Her voice came out as a whisper, rough and shaking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She got out. The door doesn't close right. I'll take her. HFY raised his head and looked at Katie. She felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure against her chest. His eyes were old. Not just years old, but deep old, heavy old. The kind of old that carried things she couldn't imagine and probably didn't want to. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the dragon spoke. She does not fear. His voice was the deepest sound Katie had ever heard. It was not just a voice. It was a vibration, a frequency that moved through the ground and up through her bones and into the center of her skull. It was a voice built for commanding armies and making declarations across battlefields. And right now, it was speaking 3 quiet words about a baby. Katie swallowed. She doesn't know she's supposed to. Something changed in HFY's expression. The hard angles of his face shifted, just slightly. He looked down at Lily again, who was still standing, still holding his scale, still grinning her 2-tooth grin. That is unfamiliar, the dragon said, more to himself than to Katie. Katie moved forward carefully, slowly, the way you cross a frozen lake when you're not sure about the ice. She reached Lily and picked her up. The baby protested, making an unhappy noise, and reaching back toward the dragon's claw. But Katie held her close and stepped back. Her whole body was trembling. Thank you, she said, because she didn't know what else to say to a being that had just chosen not to kill her child. HFY said nothing. He watched them go with those ancient, burning eyes. And Katie felt his gaze on her back, all the way to the shelter door. She went inside, sat on the floor, held Lily against her chest, and cried until she couldn't breathe. That night, after the suns had both set and the sky turned the deep purple black of Vega 9's short night, something happened that the colony's sensors picked up immediately. Danny Holt was in the operations room when the alert came in, and he called Megan Ortiz over to look at the screen. HFY had moved. For 3 years the dragon had roosted in the same spot on the plateau, the highest point, facing east, with a clear view of the open sky. It was a strategic position, a warlord's perch. Now he had shifted his entire body to the northern edge of the plateau, facing outward toward the vast empty wasteland beyond the colony. The wasteland where the ridgestalkers hunted. The wasteland where every threat to the colony came from. He had placed himself between the colony and the dark. Danny stared at the screen for a long time. Megan stood beside him with her arms crossed. What does it mean? Danny asked. Megan shook her head slowly. I think it means something happened today that we don't understand yet. Somewhere in the living quarters, Lily slept peacefully in her mother's arms, her small hand still closed around nothing, still gripping a scale that was no longer there. 3 weeks passed, and the colony did not know what to do with itself. It started with the ridge stalkers. The creatures were native to Vega 9, long, low-slung predators with too many legs and venomous spines along their backs. They hunted in packs of 6 or 7, and for 3 years they had been a constant problem, killing livestock, damaging fences, and once dragging a young farmhand named Chris Ely 50 meters before his screams brought help. The colony had learned to live with them the way you learn to live with a toothache. Always there, always hurting, never quite bad enough to fix. Then one night, the northern wasteland lit up like a second sunrise. The colonists who saw it said the fire was blue-white at its center, shifting to deep orange at its edges. It lasted about 4 seconds. The sound came after, a low roaring thunder that rattled every window in the colony. When dawn came, Danny Holt sent a scouting drone to the wasteland and found a scorched circle, half a kilometer wide. In the center of it were the blackened remains of the largest ridgestalker pack ever recorded on the planet. 17 of them, all dead. The sand beneath them had turned to glass. No one talked about it officially. No one needed to. Everyone knew. A week later, the colony's geological sensors flagged an unstable cliff face on the eastern side of the settlement, near the farms where most of the colony's food grew. The cliff had been slowly cracking for months, and the engineers estimated it would collapse within the year, burying at least 3 farm plots under several thousand tons of rock. They were drawing up plans to relocate the farms when they heard the sound. A massive grinding crash that shook the ground for almost a full minute. When the dust cleared, the cliff was gone. Not collapsed, removed. HFY had torn it apart with his claws and tail, scattering the rock across the open plain to the east, in a way that, as the colony's geologist later admitted with a kind of stunned respect, actually improved the drainage for the eastern fields. The dragon offered no explanation. He returned to his plateau and sat there as he always did, staring at the horizon like a statue. But things had changed, and everyone could feel it. Katie felt it more than anyone, because Katie had a problem. The problem was that Lily wanted to see the dragon. Every morning, as soon as Katie set her down, Lily would toddle toward the door. She was walking now, unsteady, wobbly steps that covered ground with a determination that was funny and terrifying in equal measure. If the door was open, she would head straight for the path that led to the plateau. If the door was closed, she would sit in front of it and cry. Katie built a better latch. Katie added a second latch higher up. Lily started climbing. In the end, Katie gave up trying to stop her and started going with her instead. The first time she walked Lily up to the plateau, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the baby's fingers. The path was steep and rocky, worn into the black stone by wind and time. At the top, HFY lay curled in his resting position, his tail wrapped around his body, his head resting on his forelimbs. He was so large up close that Katie's mind struggled to accept him as a living creature. He looked like a piece of the mountain that had decided to breathe. Lily let go of Katie's hand and walked toward him. No hesitation, no fear. She walked right up to his massive forelimb and slapped it with both hands, making a sound like a small drum. Then she looked up and said, in her baby voice, something that sounded like a cross between a word and a purr. HFY opened one eye. Then he uncurled his tail and brought it around in a slow, sweeping arc, creating a natural barrier between Lily and the steep edge of the plateau. A wall, a fence, a shield made of living armor. Lily sat down inside the curl of his tail and began playing with a loose pebble, perfectly happy. Katie stood there, not breathing, for about 30 seconds. Then she sat down too, because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Over the following days, she kept bringing Lily back. She couldn't explain why, even to herself. It was partly because Lily screamed if she didn't, and partly because something in Katie, the same part of her that had been a medic, that had always been drawn to things that were hurt, sensed that the dragon needed this as much as Lily did. She started to notice things. The way HFY would make low rumbling sounds when Lily was near, deep harmonic tones that the baby would try to copy, her little voice producing surprisingly accurate versions of sounds that should have been impossible for human vocal cords. The colony's linguist, Sam Pruitt, recorded these sounds on a handheld device and spent 3 nights analyzing them before he showed up at Katie's shelter at midnight, wild-eyed, saying that HFY was teaching Lily a simplified version of the Draconite tonal language. Sam said the leading scholars in the field believed it was physically impossible for humans to produce Draconite phonemes. Sam said Lily was doing it anyway. Sam said he needed to lie down. Katie also noticed other things, smaller things. The way HFY would turn his body to block the wind when it picked up, keeping Lily in a pocket of still, warm air. The way his eyes would track the child constantly, with a focus that was not the focus of a predator watching prey, but of a guardian watching something precious. The way he would sometimes stare out at the stars, with an expression that Katie, who had lost the person she loved most, recognized immediately. It was loneliness. Deep, ancient, hollowed-out loneliness. The kind that had been there so long it had become part of the structure. Load-bearing, like a crack in a wall that you couldn't fix without bringing the whole thing down. Katie started leaving things near the plateau, a container of water, some of the colony's preserved fruit. Once, on a cold night, a blanket. Not because a creature with internal plasma fire needed a blanket, but because sometimes the gesture matters more than the object. The offerings always disappeared. HFY never mentioned them. But one morning, Katie found a stone near her shelter door, smooth and black and warm to the touch, polished by something much larger than human hands. She kept it on the shelf beside her bed. Danny Holt came to her one evening, looking tired and worried. He sat on the bench outside her shelter and rubbed his face with his hands. "We've got a problem," he said. "Word gets out that we've got a Draconite war criminal living on our hill, and we'll have every political faction in human space knocking on our door. Not to mention what the other species will think." Katie looked at him. "He's not a war criminal anymore. I don't know what he is, but he's not that." Danny sighed. "I know, but the galaxy doesn't." Megan Ortiz, who had been listening from the doorway, crossed her arms and said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. "He's the only reason we're alive, Danny. The ridge stalkers, the cliff, the fact that not a single pirate has come near this system in weeks, that's all him. We can't afford to lose him, politically convenient or not." Danny nodded slowly. He didn't argue. That night, Sam Pruitt knocked on Danny's door with a different kind of bad news. He had intercepted a long-range transmission on the old Draconite military frequency. A fleet was moving through the system. Draconite warships, fast ones, armed ones. Sam's face was pale. "They're not coming for us," Sam said quietly. "They're coming for him." Katie, who had been walking past on her way home from the medical shelter, stopped in her tracks. She looked up at the plateau, where HFY sat in the dark, his silhouette black against the stars. For the first time since she had known him, the dragon looked small. The fleet arrived on a Thursday, 5 warships in tight formation, dropping out of faster-than-light travel, with a flash of blue light that turned the sky electric for half a second. The colony's sensors screamed. Danny Holt was in the operations room within minutes. Megan Ortiz beside him, both of them staring at the display as 5 hostile contacts settled into orbit above Vega 9, like vultures circling a wounded animal. The communication came almost immediately. A signal on all frequencies, human and Draconite, delivered in a voice that was deeper and harder than HFY's, like iron scraping against iron. "I am Zorath, war captain of the 3rd Burning Fleet. The elder HFY is a deserter, a traitor to the Draconite Dominion, and a disgrace to our blood. Surrender him to us, or your colony will be reduced to ash and glass. You have 12 standard hours. Danny cut the transmission and looked at Megan. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Danny sent a message to the nearest human naval outpost immediately. The response came back an hour later, and it was not good. The carrier Resolute was the closest military asset, and she was 9 days out at maximum speed. 9 days. The message included a recommendation to comply with the Draconi demands to avoid civilian casualties. Danny stared at those words on the screen. Comply with demands. Hand over the dragon. He thought about the scorched circle in the wasteland where the ridge-stalkers used to hunt. He thought about the eastern fields, thriving now because an alien warlord had reshaped the cliff with his bare claws. He thought about Lily, standing for the first time, holding a scale the size of her whole hand. He deleted the message without replying. Katie went up the plateau. She found Calvreth already awake, already watching the sky. The warships were too high to see with the naked eye, but the dragon could feel them. She could tell by the tension in his body, the way his scales had tightened flat against his skin, the way his claws dug shallow grooves into the black stone beneath him. You know they're here, she said. It wasn't a question. Zorath, Calvreth said. His voice was different now, flatter, quieter, like something that had been compressed under great weight. He was young when I left, ambitious, cruel, in the way that only the ambitious can be. Katie sat down beside him. Lily was asleep in the shelter below, unaware of everything. What are you going to do? The dragon was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, he did not look at her. He looked at the stars. I will leave. I will fly into open space and draw them away from this place. Zorath wants me, not your people. If I go, you will be safe. And you? I will die fighting. It is how my kind end. He said it simply, without drama or self-pity. He said it the way a person might say they plan to go for a walk. Katie felt something hot and furious rise in her chest. No. Calvreth turned his head to look at her. No? No, you don't get to do that. Katie stood up. She was shaking, but not from fear. She was a small human woman standing in front of a being that could end her with a thought, and she was angry. Lily took her first steps holding on to you. This colony is alive because of you. These people are safe because of you. And now you want to fly off and die alone and call that protection? That's not protection. That's giving up. The dragon stared at her. His bronze eyes burned in the dark. I have destroyed worlds, he said quietly. I have earned this ending. Maybe, but not today. Not like this. Katie's voice cracked. You don't get to make people care about you and then disappear. That's not how this works. She didn't realize the calm in her jacket was on. She didn't know that every settler in the colony had heard every word. She found out an hour later, when Danny Holt called a meeting in the main hall, and every single person showed up. 400 of them, packed into a space meant for 200, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces tired and scared, and absolutely determined. Danny stood on a crate at the front and looked out at them. You all heard, he said. I'm not going to pretend we have good options. We have no military. We have 9 days before help arrives. And we have a fleet of warships in orbit, crewed by one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. He paused. We also have a dragon who has bled for this colony without anyone ever asking him to. I'm not handing him over. But I won't order anyone to fight. This is voluntary. Nobody left. He was 52, a retired army sergeant who had come to Vega 9 specifically to get away from fighting. He had a bad knee and a scar across his neck, and eyes that had seen too much. He stood up slowly and said, "Tell me where you need me." After that, the room broke open. Megan Ortiz took charge of the colony's mining explosives, and began rigging them into improvised orbital defense launchers, using the settlement's cargo catapults as launch platforms. She had never built a weapon in her life, but she had a degree in structural engineering and a temper that could melt steel. Sam Pruitt hacked into the Draconai communication frequency and began flooding it with garbage data to disrupt their targeting systems. Chris Ely organized a network of tunnels beneath the colony, old mining shafts that could be used for ambush points and escape routes. And old Pete Callahan, 70 years old with hands like leather, spent the night welding scrap armor onto every vehicle the colony owned, humming old songs while sparks rained around him. Katie went back to the plateau before dawn. HFY had not moved. She sat down beside him again. "They're getting ready to fight for you," she said. The dragon looked down at her. His expression was something she had never seen before on his face. It was confusion. Deep, genuine confusion. "Your species is soft," he said. "Small, brief. Why do you fight for me?" Katie looked up at him. "Because you fought for us first." When Zorath's ground forces landed at noon the next day, they expected an easy operation. They expected a single aging elder, weakened by years of exile, surrounded by a few hundred terrified humans who would scatter at the first show of force. They came down in armored dropships. 30 Draconai warriors in full battle gear, each one a towering, scaled predator trained from birth for war. What they found instead was a colony that had turned itself into a trap. The first dropship landed on what appeared to be an empty field. The mining charges buried beneath it detonated on contact and turned the ship into a pillar of fire. The second dropship made it to the ground intact, but its warriors emerged into a crossfire from 3 directions. Humans in the mining tunnels, firing from positions the Draconai couldn't reach, couldn't see, and couldn't burn out without collapsing the ground beneath their own feet. And at the center of it all, rising from the plateau with a roar that shattered windows across the colony, was HFY. He fought like nothing any of them had ever seen. He was old, yes, and slower than he had been in his prime. But he was fighting for something now, and that made him different. He moved through the Draconai warriors with a terrible precision, his fire cutting through their armor, his claws finding every weakness. He did not fight like a conqueror. He fought like a wall. The battle lasted 4 hours. Ethan Garza held a choke point at the eastern tunnel entrance for 40 minutes with a mining drill and a broken rifle. And when they pulled him out, he had 3 broken ribs and a smile. Pete Callahan drove one of his armored transports directly into a Draconai barricade, jumped clear at the last second, and walked away with nothing but a burned jacket and a story he would tell for the rest of his life. In the end, Zorath came himself. He landed in the colony's central square, massive and gleaming in black and gold battle armor, and he looked at the destruction around him with contempt. "You protect vermin," he snarled at HFY. "You have forgotten what you are." HFY stood in the ruined square, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his breath heavy, his scales cracked in places. He looked at Zorath. He looked at the colonists watching from their positions. He looked at the shelter where Katie held Lily close to her chest. Then the dragon, who had never learned a human language, who had only ever spoken his own ancient tongue, said one word in English, a word he had learned from a baby, a word that Lily said to him every single time she saw him, reaching up with her tiny hands. "Family." Zorath lunged. HFY met him. It was over in seconds. The old dragon had something that the young war captain did not. He had something to lose. And that, as it turned out, made all the difference. The surviving Draconai retreated to their ships and fled the system. The colony stood, broken, bleeding, burning in a dozen places, but standing. 9 days later, the carrier Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Vega 9, expecting a disaster. What the crew found instead was a battered colony that was already rebuilding, with smoke still rising from a few craters, and a massive alien dragon sitting in the central square, while a human toddler napped on his forepaw. The captain of the Resolute, a practical woman named Nora Bright, came down on the first shuttle and stood in the square for a full minute, looking at the scene in front of her, trying to make it fit into any category she understood. It didn't. She eventually gave up and asked Danny Holt to explain. Danny explained. It took a while. The aftermath was complicated, which was the polite way of saying it was a mess. Earth's government did not know what to do with the situation. A Draconai elder, one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, had apparently bonded with a human frontier colony and fought off his own species to protect it. There were no protocols for this. There were no precedents. There were only a lot of politicians and military officials arguing in conference rooms about what it meant and what to do about it. Some voices said HFY should be arrested and turned over to the Galactic Tribunal for his past crimes. Others said the colony should be evacuated and the planet quarantined. A few, mostly the ones who had never been to the frontier and had no idea what life out there actually looked like, suggested that the whole thing was some kind of trick and that the dragon was manipulating the colonists for his own purposes. The colonists responded to all of this with a stubbornness that surprised no one who knew them. Danny Holt drafted a message to Earth's colonial authority. It was short. It said, HFY is a resident of Vega 9 and is under the colony's protection. Any attempt to remove him will be resisted. Every single colonist signed it. Even the kids, though most of their signatures were just scribbles. Megan Ortiz leaked the message to the press. Within a week, it was the most talked-about story in human space. Opinions were divided, loud, and mostly uninformed, which is how opinions usually work. But the colonists didn't care about opinions. They cared about the dragon on the hill who had bled for them, and they were not going to let anyone take him. Then something unexpected happened. A Draconai diplomatic vessel entered the system. This was remarkable in itself. The Draconai did not do diplomacy. They conquered or they ignored. They did not talk. But this ship came alone, unarmed, transmitting on a frequency that Sam Pruitt identified as one that hadn't been used in centuries, an old frequency, a formal one. The diplomat requested to speak with Katie Marsh. Not the governor, not the military, Katie. Katie took the call in the operations room with Danny and Megan beside her. The diplomat's image appeared on screen. A Draconai, smaller and leaner than HFY, with pale silver scales and eyes the color of deep water. When they spoke, their voice was quiet and careful, like someone handling something fragile. The diplomat explained that HFY had once been the greatest of the Draconai elders. Not just a warlord, an elder, which among their kind meant something far deeper. Elders were the keepers of memory, the protectors of the young, the foundation on which Draconai civilization rested. But centuries of war had broken him. The violence that the Draconai had been raised to celebrate had hollowed him out, one battle at a time, until there was nothing left inside but the memory of fire and the weight of everything it had consumed. He had stopped fighting, not because he was defeated, but because he could not bear it anymore. His own kind had exiled him for this. To the Draconai, a warrior who refused to fight was worse than an enemy. He was nothing. They had cast him out and expected him to die alone on some forgotten rock at the edge of the galaxy. We believed him lost, the diplomat said. We mourned him in the old way, which is to say, we erased his name from the rolls and tried to forget. Then the diplomat asked the question they had actually come to ask. Their voice changed when they said it, became softer, almost hesitant, as if they were afraid of the answer. Is it true that he performed the bonding breath over a human child? Katie looked at Danny. Danny nodded. Katie turned back to the screen. Yes, he did. Her name is Lily. There was a long silence on the channel. The diplomat's silver scales rippled, a Draconai expression that Katie had never seen before, but somehow understood. It was like watching someone try not to cry. "You must understand," the diplomat said finally. "The bonding breath is the most sacred act an elder can perform. It is not a gesture or a symbol. It is a binding. It means the elder has claimed the child as kin, as blood family, in your terms. It is irrevocable. It cannot be undone, not by the elder, not by any council, not by any law. It stands above everything." Katie felt something tighten in her chest. "What does that mean for us?" "It means that your child is, by our oldest and most unbreakable law, a daughter of the Draconi. And because Kael'vreth has made his home among your people, the bonding extends to the colony. All of it. Every person, every structure, every stone. Vega 9 is now under the protection of Draconi ancestral code. No fleet, no war captain, no council of our kind may touch it, ever." The diplomat paused. When they spoke again, their voice was barely above a whisper. "We thought he had forgotten how to love. We thought the war had taken that from him. It appears we were wrong. It appears a human baby taught an ancient dragon something his own kind could not." The transmission ended. Katie sat in the operations room for a long time, staring at the blank screen. Danny put his hand on her shoulder, but didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. A year passed. Lily was 2 now. She ran everywhere, fast and fearless, with dark hair that stuck up at odd angles, and eyes that missed nothing. She spoke in a strange, beautiful mix of English and low Draconi tonal speech that no human had ever produced before. Linguists across the galaxy studied recordings of her voice and wrote papers about things they couldn't explain. Lily didn't care about papers. She cared about catching bugs, throwing rocks into puddles, and visiting her dragon. Kael'vreth still sat on his plateau. But it was different now. A path had been worn into the black stone, not by wind, not by time, but by feet. Hundreds of human feet, walking up and down, day after day, until the rock itself gave in and became smooth. The settlers came to him regularly now. They brought food, though he didn't need it. They brought stories. They brought complaints about the weather, and arguments about farming techniques, and news from other colonies. They brought their children, who climbed on his tail, and played in the warm air around his body, and asked him questions that he answered in his deep rumbling voice, with a patience that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Pete Callahan came up every Sunday evening with his beat-up guitar and played old country songs while the suns went down. Kael'vreth would close his eyes and listen, and sometimes the vibrations in his chest would harmonize with the music in ways that made Pete stop playing and just stare. Ethan Garza, whose ribs had healed crooked and who walked with a slight limp now, came up to sit in silence. He and the dragon never spoke. They didn't need to. They were both old soldiers who had found something worth more than fighting, and that understanding lived in the quiet between them. Sam Pruitt came with recording equipment and endless questions, and Kael'vreth tolerated him with the weary patience of someone who has accepted that this particular small creature is never going to stop talking. Megan Ortiz came with engineering proposals, because she had decided that if the dragon was going to stay, he deserved a proper shelter, and she was going to build him one whether he wanted it or not. Kael'vreth looked at her blueprints and said nothing, which Megan took as approval. And Katie came every evening, with Lily on her hip or toddling beside her, and sat next to the dragon as the binary sunset painted the sky in golds and deep reds. She didn't bring anything. She just sat there, her shoulder against his warm scales, her daughter playing in the dust beside them, and let the silence be enough. One evening, as the first sun dipped below the horizon, and the second hung low and orange in the west, Lily climbed up onto Kael'vreth's forelimb and curled up in the crook of his leg. She was asleep in seconds, the way children are, completely, instantly, with total trust. Her small hand rested on his scale, the same scale she had grabbed the day she learned to stand. Kael'vreth looked down at her. Then he looked at Katie. Then he lowered his great head, slowly, carefully, and rested it on the ground beside them. He closed his eyes. The tension that had lived in his body for as long as anyone had known him, that coiled, restless energy of a creature that could never stop watching for the next threat, finally, quietly let go. For the first time in 1,000 years, the dragon slept without dreaming of fire. Below them, the colony glowed in the fading light. Voices drifted up from the shelters. Laughter, conversation, someone calling a child in for dinner. The wind carried the faint sound of Pete's guitar. The stars came out, one by one, above a world that had once been at the edge of nothing, and was now, somehow, at the center of something new. In the operations room, the colony's official record keeper, a quiet young woman named Haley Webb, sat down at her desk and opened the day's log. She thought for a moment, her fingers resting on the keyboard. Then she typed, "Let the record show that on this day, the people of Vega 9 do not live under the dragon's shadow. They live in his light." She saved the entry, closed the log, and went outside to watch the last of the sunset. On the plateau above, the dragon and the child slept side by side, and the colony kept breathing, steady and warm, like a heartbeat in the dark.